So to start the panel, we'll go to our first question. So can you tell us a little bit about your role now and how you got into this work? And we'll start with Nav.
Thank you very much for the introductions. Hey guys, I hope this finds you well, happy and healthy on a really sunny day here in London. Hope the sun is shining where you are. Yeah, my name is Nav, it means new in Punjabi. And I've always been obsessed with new and innovative things from a very young age. I was taken to air shows as a young boy. And my father was an aerospace engineer, and I was fascinated with how these big aircrafts could be flying in the sky. I'd come back home and I'd take apart appliances, and I would break everything, and that would really make my mum really angry. And my father passed away when I was very young, and I grew up with my mum and my two sisters, and I knew then the power of women and how important women are in the world. And I studied aerospace engineering as an undergraduate, and you know, as a graduate, like the best thing that I thought was possible in my career was to essentially join a grad program at a missile defense company or a global technology company, and that would be the best, most successful thing that I'd ever do in my whole life. And that's what I did. I joined Dyson's graduate program. I applied for so many graduate roles that I had no interest in, but I knew that this would be the kind of the best thing for my career. And you know, 3.5 years in, I got really fed up of making vacuum cleaners for rich people. And I decided to quit my job and do something more with my engineering. I wanted to help people. And so I moved to South India to make clean and efficient cook stoves for people who use wood to cook their food. And there I met my next door neighbor, a lady called Divya, who was a 30-something stay-at-home mom, spoke perfect English, learned in high school but never used again. She had 2 children, got married at the age of 16. I wanted to work but didn't have the time because she was spending so much time on unpaid, relatively unproductive tasks. And it was this one day that I saw Divya hand washing her clothes that I wanted to make a manual washing machine for her. She couldn't afford an electric washing machine. She didn't have access to water and electricity as we are so lucky to have. And it was through seeing this through Divya's eyes, my friend's eyes, that I promised her a manual washing machine, and that's where the washing machine project started. So I'm the founder of the washing machine project. We're grassroots volunteer-led organizations that make manual washing machines that save time, water, and effort for people like Divya. And you know, traction is great, and we've been really lucky to have a lot of support from lots of different organizations and people all around the world. So yeah, in summary, that's a bit about the role and how I got into it. Should I go on to the next question, or do I go to?
I'm not entirely sure. I think I might jump in with my answer to that question rather than so we each give it a breather.
That would be great.
Great. So hi everyone. I have nowhere near as impressive a story as Nav has. That is a hard act to follow. So when I sort of started thinking about science and tech, I'm not from a particularly sort of science and techy family. I was lucky enough to be sort of surrounded by people at school who were interested in science and tech, and a school which had good facilities, things, you know, I could get my sort of hands dirty, as it were, and build things and make things. I basically knew I was good at maths and I was good at science, but maybe not the incredible whiz kids who would, you know, be some wonderful professor, win a Nobel Prize or anything like that. But I did know I liked building things. So I went to university for engineering. Even then, I wasn't entirely sure where to specialize. So I didn't pick aerospace or electronic or anything like that. I just did general engineering. I tried a little bit of everything. I spent time designing and building bridges. I spent time making circuit boards and robots. And eventually I decided that what I kind of liked the most was innovation itself, the idea of how people come up with really interesting ideas and how they turn them into realities, sort of a general idea of engineering as a process, and how you take something that might work in a lab and how you turn that into a product that might help 10 people, and then how you turn that into a product that can help 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 people, that kind of thing. So I went into and did my master's in manufacturing engineering. I was really lucky to get to spend quite a lot of my time working on projects that really interested me and were interested in my principles. Part of my master's project was working on using 3D printing techniques and applying sort of novel clothing manufacturing processes. We looked at something some of you might have heard of called batik printing, a way of sort of printing dyes and clothes from Indonesia, which is very, very labor intensive, very, very hard to do, and it's increasingly getting outclassed by sort of big mass produced options that are coming into the region. And we looked at how we could sort of bring that very creative option back to sort of the usual when the people were hand making those, using a bit of technology, using things like 3D printing and additive manufacturing. So I ended up, after sort of university, having had a chance to build lots of things and taste a lot of different areas of engineering, but still not entirely knowing what I wanted to do with my career. And I saw lots of my friends and colleagues going off to, I think it's sort of now we're saying, very prestigious jobs, working at, you know, big tech companies or big financial companies or, you know, big consulting companies, that kind of thing. And I thought, what I've never actually really got to try is the public sector, you know, charity work and government work. So I joined the civil service fast stream, which means I've, in a sort of very short career time, I only graduated in 2019, so I've only been in a job for a couple of years. I've got to jump around loads of different stuff. I've done climate diplomacy, which is sort of very close to my heart. I'm working on how we can get partnerships between countries to foster clean energy, put lots more money into things like smart grids and hydrogen and things that, you know, will change, rather than more medium technologies, things like carbon capture or energy efficiency improvements, that kind of thing. I spent time in the Department for Transport, looking at emerging technologies, how things like AI and autonomous vehicles might affect us in the future, how things like smart cities might collect lots of our data in the future and how that can be used ethically and for the public good. And now I'm at the Campaign for Science Engineering, sort of more generally arguing for the role of science and engineering sort of throughout society. It's not maybe on that same level we think of say the economy or that kind of thing. Science and tech is seen as sort of a bit more of a niche, and I'm part of a team now that's hoping to sort of bring the value of science and tech into the wider public debate and make it that sort of doorstop issue. And that's me.
Both really hard acts to follow, and I think I'm next. Yes. Yep. So really impressive already. A little bit about myself. So I have a multidisciplinary background. I started off my academic journey in psychology, and specifically cognitive neuropsychology. My interest was looking at the functional correlates of depression in an area of the brain called the hippocampus. So I was studying that, but at the same time, my passion has always been sort of in development work. So I started exploring that through environmental psychology, and then ended up doing my PhD here in London, where I went into behavioral economics, and I looked at how small island states how you can incentivize small farmers in small island states to take up climate change adaptive and also biodiversity conservation behaviors. After my PhD, I started, I've worked in various consultancies, always around the small island states issue, climate diplomacy, small island states, trade, and development. And I was an advisor to the UNFCCC COP23 chief negotiator. So she was the presidency chief negotiator, and I was looking at a wide range of issues, including health and agriculture and adaptation, and those sort of niggly bits of diplomacy, which I find really, which I'm a big geek about and I love. And after that, I got into my current role at the moment. So at the moment, I'm a policy advisor at the climate change think tank E3G, and my focus is on cool economy, finance, and diplomacy work. And one of the issues I'm working on currently is alongside the United Nations Environment Programme's Cool Coalition on convening an informal dialogue between multilateral development bank stakeholders on sustainable cooling, with the purpose of mainstreaming this issue within their projects and portfolio work. And I got into this work as equitable access to cooling is going to be increasingly a major issue for tropical zones, particularly with those who are most vulnerable and also with the least adaptive capacity, and also achieving net zero cooling is also integral to meeting the Paris Agreement's lower bound target of 1.5 degrees of warming. And I think I ground all of my work around this target of 1.5 degrees. I'm from Fiji myself, so I see the pressure that any temperature increase can have on our way of life, on our existence, the existential threat of that, and also the strain that displacement can have on well-being, on communities, on societies. So yeah, that's basically me.
Wonderful. And Laura?
Again, three very hard acts to follow here. So I'm sort of a fraud actually, because I actually still have a tech job, but I also do a lot of volunteering on the side for the campaign to stop killer robots. So I'll sort of tell you about how I got where I am. So I need to update the bio I sent you, because I've actually been very close to 20 years in industry now. I taught myself programming as a teenager and went to university for computer science here in Dublin. Then after I graduated, right into the teeth of the dot-com bust, if anyone else is old enough to remember that, I worked for almost 10 years for a company that built social welfare systems. And that was quite nice. It sort of felt like a good thing to do in the world, help people get their their benefits faster. And no, we did not have any contracts like Universal Credit. But after 10 years, I sort of moved on, and I worked in e-commerce for a very short period of time, and then moved on to Google. And this was in 2012 or so. This was a time when it seemed sort of reasonable to work for Google, because we had all this sort of narrative around all these amazing benefits that search and information and so on were bringing to the world. But then the Snowden revelations happened, and it sort of became clear how much data that Google were holding, and everything became a little bit murkier and grayer. Anyway, ultimately, a few years after that, while I was working at Google, I was asked to work on an aspect of a thing called Project Maven, which was a project that was intended to basically use machine learning to analyze military drone surveillance footage. So for finding, finding targets to do drone strikes on. And that was very much a bridge too far for me. So I ended up leaving Google because of that. And after I left Google, I got involved with the campaign to stop killer robots and the NGO ICRAC, International Committee for Robot Arms Control, which I volunteer for. I'm not staff there. So I'm doing that for the last 3 years, and it's sort of been interesting for me because I've gotten to take a bunch of expertise that I acquired during my software career about how computer systems fail and kind of what sort of safeguards you need to be able to use them for high risk and consequential kind of applications, and sort of to help to use that in the argument against more autonomy and more automation in weapon systems. So I've gotten to go to the UN, and I spent a lot of time sort of traveling around, talking to policymakers and so on and so forth. So it's been a bit of a strange career progression for a software engineer. I think my career is probably still developing. Right now, I'm actually finishing up writing a master's thesis on the side about ethics of transferring risk from military organizations to civilians in warfare. And who knows what my next job is going to be. It may well not be traditional software engineer anymore. So, you know, I too am inspired by the previous speakers and their non-traditional engineering career paths.
That's great. Thank you so much, all of you, for those introductions. It was absolutely fascinating. The next question, it kind of touches upon themes that you've already mentioned so far. So maybe we can handle this one briefly. But the question is, how have ethics shaped the direction you've taken in your career? And perhaps we could do the same order as on the last.
Yeah, so I would start by saying, wow, what great company. Yeah, real privilege to be a part of this panel. I would really echo the points that Laura was saying. I felt that every good bit of engineering that I was doing was just making a vacuum cleaner for a middle class white person in a rich country. And for me personally, that didn't really sit right. I wanted to really help people, and everyone amongst me that was working in defense companies. You know, there's nothing wrong with defense, but you know, every good bit of engineering that they're doing was making a missile that would go further, better aerodynamics to essentially kill people. And you know, for me, that was you know, a step too far. Again, as Laura says, and you know, I think culturally as well. And being a part of community, seeing suffering in all walks of life. I know that as an engineer or someone that has some sort of technical knowledge, that you know it's within my ability to help people or hinder people, and I know what I want to do. That's it. Over to you, James.
So, yeah, over to me. So I think in terms of how ethics have shaped my career, I think maybe I'll slightly differentiate myself from the rest of the panel in that, but it's maybe something that's more typical along most of the workforce, is that I think throughout my sort of university career and extra project to do that, ethics was always a big part of what I was thinking about. I want to do something that is socially aware, that, you know, leaves the world better than when I found it. When I get into a job as part of a very big bureaucracy, the civil service, which is very much used to talking, you know, in value for money terms and that kind of things. Ethics is this natural part of your work that can slip away. It can, you know, it's not there every day. It's something I think you have to actively think about. And I think that's why I've sort of consistently, very happy to be invited to this panel today and to do it, is to be constantly thinking about these kind of issues. I think in large organizations, they think in economic terms, quantitative terms, and often the sort of social and the, I guess, ethical side of it is, you know, in government, I think often left to politicians, but it shouldn't be left like that. It should be, you know, taking part of each, every one of our piece of work, and ultimately the advice we give and the projects we develop and the programs we create are created with our ethical standards in mind, and so that's set. And if we're not doing that throughout the process, we're not giving the sort of politicians and the sort of society we serve, I think, the right programs and the programs that are going to actually make that positive difference. So I'd always be a big advocate for, even if you think, these are some people doing these absolutely insane, incredible things, which they're taking these real ethical stands. That's no reason at all why you shouldn't, you know, take an interest, read stuff, try where you can to set your own standards and incorporate them, your own ethical standards, and incorporate in your work. I think that's much more often how you can make those little bits of incremental changes, especially in some sort of larger organizations. It's over to Sindra.
Thank you. Thanks, James. So the ethical issues raised in your field of work. In the work I do, I think justice and equity are always going to be at the forefront of all of our discussions. So everything we do has that kind of equity, justice lens. And one of the things that really impacted my journey when I was at at the climate change conference COP23. Then the chief negotiator, then this amazing woman, Ambassador Nazat Khan, she's now the president of the Human Rights Council, and she always challenged us to apply this rights-based lens to our work in climate diplomacy, and also wider, and when we're thinking about development as well. So I've carried that forward in my work, and I think it's really important for someone from what we deem the South as well to maintain that kind of lens, especially if you're working in organizations that might be in the North, to keep that that North-South voice sort of balanced, and ensure that the equity and justice conversation remains at the forefront of your work.
So I would echo quite a lot of what the previous speakers are saying. You know, I think that ethical concerns and concerns around justice are really sort of bound up in an awful lot of software engineering concerns. People think of these things as largely value neutral, but they're really not, right? I mean, many systems are pulling in large amounts of personal data around people, effectively doing or enabling surveillance, which is obviously a huge civil liberties issue, privacy issue. And then there's this whole other sort of set of systems that make very consequential decisions about people. I think the way we're moving at the moment is, you know, we're starting to see more decisions made around education. I mean, think about the calculated grades fiasco last summer, and we're probably not going to have the same thing again this summer, right? You know, but also in areas like justice, policing, militarization, so many areas, you know, we're seeing a lot more automation. We're seeing systems sort of move out of the hands of people and more into the hands of software. And that can provide, you know, very, very powerful policy levers when it's misused. So I think one of the biggest examples we've seen of that in recent years is when the US ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they decided that they were going to change their policy in the Trump era to detain people in circumstances where they wouldn't have previously detained them. They would just continue letting them go about their business as undocumented immigrants. But when they changed their policy, literally what they did was they changed their computer code to say they have this decision support system for their officers. They changed it to say always detain. You know, when we start building in tech into these systems that effectively apply policy, we're providing this very, very powerful kind of policy lever, which, you know, and I think that software engineers have to start being, I mean, I think we need to continue being vocal about this kind of thing and watchful for it. So I think it's potentially intertwined with nearly everything that we do. And then, you know, there's second order effects. So Sindra is talking about climate. You know, systems like Bitcoin are just a crazy thing to have in existence in a world where we're, you know, facing down these sea level increases. You know, so there's problems everywhere. So I think it's, you know, I mean, where are the ethical issues? I mean, where are there not ethical issues?
That's great, thank you. So I think in the last question we touched upon some of the ethical issues raised in some of your work. Perhaps now we could talk about what are kind of strategies to help navigate these issues when they do arise.
I'm going to cheat here and maybe ask for some advice from you guys who kind of work through ethics a lot through your day-to-day jobs. But for me, essentially it's participatory methods of interaction with our beneficiaries who we're trying to help. You know, we're making a manual washing machine for people who have hand washed their clothes their whole lives. And I have no right as a man born in London to impose solutions on people who have been doing this practice for their whole lives. And so we take a lot of time to understand users and consumers and make sure that in the design process when we're creating these solutions. That's one thing. The second thing is, so that's one area. And then the second area is, I don't want students coming out of STEM subjects or just subjects in general to chase after graduate programs or entry-level jobs in missile defense companies or companies that they have no interest in, but are really just have the best pizza at the graduate stand or give out the best free pens, you know. Um, uh, and so, you know, I think that's all about communication and making things like the washing machine project and other great roles like the panels are going through right now, and saying that these are the other things that you could be doing. Um, yeah.
I think for me, to give it I guess a pithy couple of minutes answer, it normally comes down to transparency and a sort of open questioning. And this is me again talking as a civil servant, being part of a very large organisation. I think it's kind of picking on Nav's point there. I think it's kind of a tragedy. You get somebody incredibly talented, people coming out of STEM degrees, going into their first job and really, to a lot of degree, not really knowing what they're doing. They've done a lot of these sort of academic study and they might have built some things, but when they're, say, in my case, coming up, getting involved in sort of clean energy and climate diplomacy, so much is just presented to you as fact. This is how it is. We have these relationships because these are how it is and this is how it's done. Applying a sort of that ethical lens to it and really considering, well, why do we do this? What are the underlying reasons? Are they still valid? Can they be changed? That kind of thing. And I think often it can be hard to challenge those, especially when you're quite young. But having that very transparent process. So in the case of government, again, opening up sort of your plans and I guess more practically your code. I had not heard of that story about how ICE had applied that before. That's kind of crazy, but I think that's something that COVID's shown quite well, is the more open we are with our plans, the more open we get good independent expertise criticising it, promoting improvement, both from just a base technical point, like making things more efficient or operate better, but also being that external challenge. Are your assumptions right? Are you actually thinking about all these people? Are you thinking about, I think what people say, second order effects? So I think it's that transparency and that having that system in place where people can challenge without, you know, fear, reprisals, that kind of thing, that it's going to in some way impact them significantly, I think is the key.
I'm going to echo Nav and James as well. I think transparency is extremely important, as is being able to get all stakeholder views as well, right? To be able to listen is something that not everyone is able to do, but it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. And I would also say questioning everything. Be disruptive in your thought. If the entrenched model that is that the best way to do things? Is there a better way? Why is that the entrenched model? Just question everything. And I think that would open up new avenues of thought, like even the current growth models. Why are we so focused on growth? Is that the right way for our future? Is there a better way? I think so. So yeah, basically that's my advice.
That's amazing advice from the first three speakers. You know, Sindra, you said you question everything, and what I was going to say as the biggest thing was that as technologists, we need to look at the big picture. You know, question how does my little part of the world, my little thing that I'm building, how does it fit into to what's happening more broadly? You know, one of the things that's so interesting when you look at, I think, ethical problems in tech, or, you know, times that people have built systems that do not have a good effect on the world. A lot of the time it's because, you know, there's all these different people in, you know, building these different parts of the system, and then you kind of put it together and it's like, oh my God, this could be used in terrible ways. So you got to think about the big picture and actual sort of impacts on real people and the planet as well. So think holistically, I think, is my biggest thing. And fully echo James as well when he talks about transparency. I think one of the biggest one of the issues that comes with technology is, it's like I said before, it becomes a way to sort of hide aspects of policy. When things are written down in manuals, it's a lot easier for the public and for the civil service to interrogate what that policy is, than if it's in source code that relatively few people have access to and the ability to read. And I've been programming for 25 years, and it's still difficult for me to read thousands of lines of code and to kind of piece together what the impact of that actually is. So yeah, and just also to say the creativity of Nav, and what you've done is you're not looking for how can I avoid doing harm in the world. You're looking at how can I make a positive difference, and that is so powerful as well.
Thanks, Laura. I have an extra point to add on to this, which is my role at Engineers Without Borders UK. Over the next 10 years, their strategy is to tackle some of these kind of points that we're discussing here. And they've coined the phrase globally responsible engineering, so that no matter what you're doing, no matter what organization you're part of, no matter what position or what rung of the ladder you are in, you're thinking globally responsibly. So that there's an ethical voice in your head when you go through that decision-making process, or your manager is telling you to do something, or you've been given a task, to question it in a globally responsible mindset or an ethical way. And I think in my interactions with students that are coming out of university now or going through university is that the Gen Z amongst us are really angry about the world that they're inheriting. And there's loads of things that are happening right now, people asking questions, and I'm very hopeful that things will change, and people will start addressing some of these pressing problems that are unfolding amongst us.
Thank you, everyone. So we're heading into the final part of the event now. So we're on our last questions. So for our audience members, really encourage you to submit some questions, especially as we're a small group. If you feel comfortable like coming on camera or coming on audio and sharing your question directly, that's always an option. But otherwise, feel free to put it in the chat and just flag that it's a question so we don't miss it. So the final question from us for our panelists is, what advice do you have for STEM students beginning a career, particularly if they're interested in exploring the ethical dimensions to the area that they've studied at university?
If I could skip and go to James, and I'll probably answer at the end because I've already spoken. I'm sure you're sick of my voice. So.
Sure, I'll go. So what's my number one piece of advice? So I think, and maybe this is a bit separate from the ethical question as well, I think most people are, and I think one of maybe the great benefits of what is quite a fraught and sort of scary job market at the moment is that you can be much more flexible in your career. You can try lots and lots of different things. And I heavily encourage most people to do that. Programming skills are becoming more and more important. If you've got them, you are, way above the sort of 99th percentile of people if you're coming into sort of big organizations who, and you have those. But try other things. You don't need to go down your niche, because I think if anything I see that's maybe most stifle sort of maybe ethical discussion is people feeling it's like not in their remit, that they're no expert on this, and they're just one piece of a smaller puzzle, and it's impossibly complex for them to sort of grasp about the outcomes of this, and it should be left to other people or someone there. And I think maybe the sort of maybe disheartening thing is that often there isn't one person who's just thinking about this. It's kind of relying on us all being part of that ethical discussion and incorporating it throughout our work, and having that challenge at every stage. It's, if a product or a service or an idea has got the way that it's got to the CEO of the company, maybe sometimes fairly that CEO goes, well, people might have thought about the ethical or thought about some of the impacts, and they might expect. I think there's far too big a tendency for people to assume that someone else has done it, that someone else will think of it, and you should never be worried about being that challenge yourself and bringing it, even if you're quite new to an industry or just in your career in general. I think there's always, I mean, great thing about the internet, endless podcasts, things like Tech Won't Save Us, and great articles and things that you can do. You can become much more versed in these issues and speak, from good arguments made by very intelligent people, and you can represent those, I think, quite well and quite easily, and enough people don't do that.
That was a really good response. I don't know if I have too much to add to James's comment there, but I think starting off with a career in tech or in STEM with an ethics view, I think personally my experience is that you're always going to be developing, you're always going to be like branching out and learning. So wherever you land may not be where you're going to be, forever. So keep that in mind, that that there's going to be opportunities and ways and avenues that will come up that can change your complete direction, and that's a good thing, because the world really needs this kind of multidisciplinary focus for some of the really tough problems that are out there, from AI to climate, and everything in between, right? So yeah, try your hand at things that maybe you think that you aren't made for, but maybe you are exactly the right person for that.
I think the points made by the previous speakers are brilliant, so I'm going to say something a little bit different. So I think one of the biggest things that we can do as scientists and technologists is be good at our craft. One of the fundamental professional ethical things is, be good at what you do. So in my end of the world, technology, that would encompass things like knowing about computer security and not building insecure systems, knowing about data ethics and not building systems that hoard too much data unnecessarily, keeping up with emerging issues. So I'm a bookworm, you can probably tell. So read books like Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction to sort of stay abreast of emerging problems and dilemmas, right? And I would very much echo James, who said, you have to be willing to speak out if you see something. If you do find yourself in a situation where you need to speak out about something at work, keep your cool, gather your evidence, make a reasoned argument, and escalate that up. There are I was going to say, in the EU we have whistleblower legislation. I'm so sorry you're not in the EU anymore. But whistleblower processes have been moving on pretty well. And a lot of companies now will have things like an anonymous drop where you can put information in if you don't feel comfortable, like blowing the whistle personally. So there's a bunch of stuff you can actually do. And Sindra earlier mentioned justice. I think that everyone in every profession should probably read Michael Sandel's Justice. It's a great introduction to the topic, and there's a bunch of signposts to other thinkers there for people who are more interested in going deeper. And just remember that there is a whole sort of history of science and technology, and it's worth going back and reading. If you're in tech, things like Neil Postman, and if you're not, things like The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Just being aware that there's that whole sort of discipline there of people who are thinking about the impact of technology and science, and not just in the last 10 years. So that's all I got. That's probably enough.
I would recommend every kind of young person or every person that's graduating and starting a career in STEM to find a mentor. Students beginning a career, often, it's quite lonely and burdensome, and you're kind of figuring out things and not really sure what you want to do. I mean, I wanted to become an accountant when I was a kid, or an astronaut, and a DJ. So I had no clue what I wanted to do. So, I wish I had someone like Laura, who was my mentor when I was graduating, to show me the way. So I would go online. LinkedIn is a really good tool for this kind of stuff, or even in your own universities, and find someone that's 5 years or 10 years ahead of you that you really admire, and ask them for some hints, tips, and tricks to be your mentor.
That's great. I might jump in here again to flag that the Project in Ethical Science is running a pilot mentorship scheme this summer. So we have a group of mentors from academia and from government to serve as mentors just over July and August. And I will be sure to send out some more information on this to the attendees. That's great. And I can see Andrew has just dropped in the chat a link to the Ethical Science Project webpage if you'd like more information about the project. So now we have around 10 minutes just to ask any kind of remaining questions that you, our audience, have. And again, like, feel free to ask your question live if you'd like to come onto camera. Otherwise, you can also place it in the chat. If I can perhaps get the question started. One thing I think about as someone, I'm not like a fresh graduate now. I'm doing a PhD and I've been finished with my undergrad for a few years, but I do feel still quite junior in my workplace. And one thing I worry about and struggle is, especially when you're someone new to a team or new to the industry, or just it's your first job from university, sometimes being the person that raises ethical concerns in your work can be quite challenging. And I was wondering if you had any kind of specific advice on being the person or being someone who raises these questions, and good ways to go about it and ways to find the confidence to raise any issues that do come up.
I'll jump in with someone, I guess, who's, I'll caveat, I've not seen anything in my work yet that has given me huge ethical concerns or something. But what I've found, I guess, a little bit easier, and this isn't, you want to have done this before the big ethical problem comes up, is that it's often easier to give, I guess, kind of neutral suggestions about how you set up the governance or the systems to deal with those kind of problems. In my first one, there was it wasn't really ethical, it was sort of kind of political differences between teams, sort of inter-team things, and I helped to set up just an anonymous complaint and a sort of embarrassing questions box where people could raise things. But then that went on for people to raise about more sort of general work stuff. We think this program isn't structured in the right way, we're leaving out this key technology, we think it could be really helpful. And that sort of anonymous way to raise feedback, it removes those sort of interpersonal or sort of interpersonal politics of it, and that can be really, really helpful. And often, speaking of something, often more senior people maybe don't think of this, but they'd love to introduce a few new initiatives like that. It sort of hits their thing. So often they'll receive those kind of maybe sort of structural things quite well, and you can get those in, and then you can use those as a mechanism for change. But yeah, that's doesn't really answer the question directly. How do you do
it? I wonder if we can raise ethics in just in the workplace in general. So I've experienced a number of instances of racism in the workplace where I've kind of raised directly with employees, and I remember the reason why I mention it is because it's quite transferable, I think, into other questionable practices in workplaces when it comes to ethics. But there's this one guy who was mocking an accent, and I had his email address. I emailed him some articles of why this is not a cool thing to do, and he kind of gently got the message, and he apologized, and he said, I wish he just came up to me rather than put this on an email, because he didn't want it to be traceable. But I think that was a nice example of raising questionable ethical practices in the workplace.
I touched on this on the question that before. Sorry, Nav, you were done, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to, you know, and very much like Nav was saying, you know, be, you know, writing it down is great than it is traceable. I think that it actually is important. But having it written down as well will sort of make it a little bit less less easy for emotions to come through, keep it more neutral, keep it factual, keep it well argued. So I think Nav has shown a good example there. And you know, like James is saying, it's if your workplace doesn't have some way of giving anonymous feedback, it is a great thing to lobby for in case you should ever need it.
Laura, what was your experience like with Google and kind of resigning in protest? That must have been a real challenging time for you, right?
That was a crazy time. So I wasn't the only person who left around that time, and I wasn't the only person who was very unhappy about the Maven thing. So I wasn't entirely alone. So that was very helpful. It was you know, we had thousands of people sign the petition. We had people like Meredith Whitaker who were working and arguing about it as well. So it was I was just part of a much larger thing there. Like the thing that was different about me is I think I'm the only person who's really spoken, well, one of few people who've spoken about it publicly afterwards in the media. And it was my willingness to do that, I think, is sort of my big contribution there. And it's scary because, you know, let's just put it this way, they have a lot more money to pay lawyers than I do, but then again, they also have a reputation to lose. So, you know, sometimes you just have to do it, I guess.
Amazing. Yeah, really inspirational stuff.
It's scary stuff.
Yeah, have you, maybe this is a bit personal, but have Google since been in touch, or have you had?
Weirdly enough, and I think it's because the left hand doesn't know what the right hand does, but they do ping me occasionally every year or so and go, "Hey, are you interested in coming back?"
Oh, really? Okay.
It's weird. Big organizations are very strange.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But no, it's been fine. Yeah. Cross fingers.
I appreciate the mention you made there, Laura, of kind of working with other people. I think like building coalitions can definitely help with that individual fear of an uncertainty around what will happen if you raise something. Sindra, I'm not sure if you had anything you want to say on that question, but we do also have a question for Laura. So maybe we could go to Sindra, and then Laura, there's a question for you in the chat.
No, I'm conscious of time, so I think just go to the question.
Cool, thank you. So the question is, what do you think about open letters and campaigns from staff in big companies? Andrew asks, is this the right way to make changes?
I think it's sort of a little bit of a sign of a broken system where we have given these big tech companies so much power that they're not, I guess, more publicly accountable and better regulated. So ultimately, that is what I would like to see happen. I don't think that we should be relying on people to speak out in companies, although it's great when it happens. I think the open letters are a very good way to start a conversation, to draw attention to an issue, because they can get quite a bit of media attention. And if there is sufficient internal pressure, it can make some differences. So we've seen quite a number of these in the tech world in the last few years, like it's happened at Salesforce, at Microsoft, at Google, and Amazon. I think in all those cases, it sort of had medium impact. So we have things like Salesforce have ended up, you know, hiring ethical officers, and Google wound up not doing the second and subsequent phases of Maven. But you know, has it changed the world? I think it's difficult to say that it has. I think it's one thing that you can do as part of a wider campaign, but ultimately I believe in more regulation and more transparency.
That was great, thank you. As we've not had a question, I might again use my position just to ask one question specifically. Oh, we do just have one question come in, and maybe this can be the final question, as it is quite close to 5. But Roberta has asked, scientists seem to be in general much less involved and less active in trade unions, which can be really helpful for organizations to encourage change in big companies. What can we do to get scientists involved in these? So again, this is talking again about this idea of working in collaboration and in alliance to help affect change.
I'll jump in just for a little. I mean, this is a very, very good question. And I kind of think in the scope of the rest of the minute, probably not going to get an amazing answer out of us. I do think, sort of this come back to earlier, I think in general, yeah, there's absolutely fantastic scientists and people in tech who are doing great work, but in like communicating the real like value of our work to like the wider public, I do think we're maybe not as good as that as we can. You know, big science and tech often is seen through the lens of, you know, these big companies like Google and stuff, these sort of quite transient things. The academic community can be seen, I think, in lots of cases unjustifiably as elite and sort of separate. I think there is something, I think this links into the trade union work about communicating how this, you know, it's lab work does have an lab work and product development does have an impact on your day-to-day life. It's, you know, every part of our lives today is being irreparably sort of changed by technological developments really over the last sort of 20, 30 years that have happened, and that making sure scientists are a big part of the changes that we're going to have in the next 5, 10 years and that their voices are heard should be something we're all invested in and we all want. Yeah, I don't have a good solution for how we do that, but yeah, I think that's part of a bigger question about how science communicates to the public.
Do any of the other speakers want to respond to that question?
I can respond briefly. I think one of the hurdles that we have, in at least on the sort of technology and software side, is a perception that trade unions are not for us in some way, that they're for different kinds of jobs. You know, civil service jobs or public service jobs and manual jobs, and these are the ones that are sort of traditionally associated with it, as opposed to, well, of course, engineers have traditionally had professional associations and not unions per se. But in my sector, we're sort of not really professionals because we're not credentialed, and our professional associations are weak. But we also don't have unions, so it does lead to a very sort of atomized, individualized workforce. It is a problem, which I don't have a great solution to right now, unfortunately.
Can I just come in really briefly? So it's not really a solution and how we can get scientists involved, but another avenue that's really important for them to be contributing in is also within the sort of public multilateral process sphere as well, which can trickle down and have really major impacts as well.
Wonderful. So thank you so much to our audience today for joining and spending this hour with us on such a sunny afternoon. And thank you even more so to our amazing panelists. It's been so interesting and sounds kind of cheesy, but quite inspiring, like hearing about your experiences and the different ways that ethics has shaped your careers. I think a lot of these stories have been quite personal as well. So thank you really for sharing that. It's really appreciated, and hopefully both our audience here and our audience who will be able to access the recording of this will also be really grateful for the guidance and experiences that you shared today. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today, and I hope the rest of your day and your week goes well.